We could be having a conflict right now. It's us and them. When you put two walls next to each other, what happens? They don't move. But fuck me, mate. You got a pie. I got a pie. Let's be happy.
How would you define conflict?
Conflict is just a negotiation. Where do you walk away? Being blind in conflict allows you to survive, but you can't thrive. I am a qualified hostage negotiator. I have worked in the field of negotiating, and it's not pleasant. Unfortunately, we're all time travelers, and being a time traveler, we're too busy either reliving the past or projecting what our future is. It's a simple model, and so many people forget about. Those would be the 4 things that we need to do. But simplicity is complicated.
Kline Martin is a communication and conflict coach with a unique background as an international security specialist where he managed some of the world's most high-risk situations. Today, as the founder of Dadee Services, he helps fathers and leaders navigate tension, negotiation, transformation, and to respond with integrity, insight, and calm under pressure.
The world is such a lonely place, and the only friend that I continuously have is that little voice inside my head, and it's really mean. No matter what type of human being we are, we all suffer from our own selves. I'm being played like a puppet. Fuck this happiness. It's fleeting. Pursuit of happiness, you're gonna chase your tail. What values do you hold really, really dearly? I've started to work on unconditional love, both for my partner, my daughter, and me. You can't define conflict as positive or negative. It's energy. Having conflict with someone is actually positive. It all comes back to a simple structure, but it goes through 3 different phases. So get granular with your emotion, get granular with your negotiation, get granular with your communication, because
Did you know that 44% of podcasts stop after episode 3? So that means all that time, energy, and money is just wasted, and you never get to truly see the benefits of podcasting. So if you want your show to stay alive and healthy, you can book a call in the link below, and let's get started today. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Hope It Helps. And guys, today I have someone on the podcast that I'm so excited to speak to. We met a couple weeks ago. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Kline Martin. Kline, welcome to the show, man.
thanks, my man. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it. So I always like to give the audience context of, how I meet my guests. So Kline and I attended an event a few weeks ago that was centered around, men and, men sharing and so on. And it was just a very interesting experience for me because I've never done something like that before. And it was quite humbling to know that, you're not the only one that struggles with these things. And that kind of plays into the work you do with Dadee Services, which we're going to touch on a little later. But one of the things that really struck out to me was we just seemed to, hit it off. I really appreciated the comments and the feedback you were giving. And then after we had that sit down at your house, I'm like, oh my God, Kline has to come on the show because conflict resolution and communication I've been doing a lot of work on the communication piece, but conflict resolution and negotiation is something that I know everyone struggles with, whether, in personal relationships, at work. So what I wanted to do today is kind of demystify all this, give people a new perspective on how to approach these things, get some frameworks and tools that they can start applying, today to start really, moving that needle. Mm-hmm. But before we get into all of that, Kline, why don't you give all of us a little bit of background about yourself and we'll take it from there.
Wow, it's already a great intro. Well, where to start? How long ago? I guess that I've been in the Middle East now a decade almost. My background is crim psych, and then I have another piece of beautiful paper that says I can do cool shit. And where it all stems from is the abilities to challenge myself.
Challenge yourself.
Continuously challenge myself and put myself in unique positions where I'm the only one that can get myself out of those positions. And this is where I think having a growth mindset really allows me to dig deep and remain humble, because so many other people do the same thing as what I do. It's just that there's not many of them. So, I don't know really where to start. Maybe you should ask me a question about like my origin, because I have so many different parts of it. So it's kind of confusing.
Sure, sure. I know sometimes it can be hard to like consolidate that into one simple sentence. But what I guess from you, so I know you worked across Afghanistan and Yemen and so on, working with the UN as a security advisor, and you have experience in hostage negotiating as well. So you've been in the highest pressure situations where literally lives are on the line, and I think you have from our conversation, you're really passionate about psychology and how people think, and I wanted to maybe start from there. Like, what was the reason that was the path what motivated you or interested you to go down that path?
See, and this is why I really like talking to other people opposed to myself, because I get them to do the cognitive lifting. Makes it easier, right? In a conversation, if you were to summarize all the things that I've done, it's too much. Yeah. It's too hard. So then I'm like, well, I'll let them know what they want to know. So then I'm not having to be that one. So when it comes to psychology and the drive, it all stems from childhood, right? We've all had tragedies, losses, and, we all have our own kinds of attachment issues. So it all stems from there, realistically. And my drive to continuously learn is related to my neurodiversity. In grade 6, they're in Australia, there's all these stars on the wall for all the kids who did the spelling at the end of the week. I never got a star. So it kind of singled me out as there was something different about me. I didn't learn the same way, and I didn't feel the same way. So all through high school, I was a poor achiever. And the outcome of that is I became a chef, because fingers don't lie, right?
Facts.
I could use them.
Yeah.
So I did that, and towards the end of my apprenticeship, I saw one of my idols, a chef, go through a breakup. And I swore to myself, I never want to do that. I never want to have so much passion and just lose everything because of something that can basically be disposed of. So at this point, I did a couple of hard yards and then started at university when I figured out, wow, psychology is something I really should know about. And the reasons behind it is because it's so simple. But simplicity is complicated.
That's a great line. That's so true.
And what makes it so complicated is that the abilities to communicate with somebody, like we're doing now, it seems really easy. But there's a process. It starts here. It's like, what do I want to communicate? How do I feel about that communication? What am I going to hear back from that person? So you have all of these different processes going on here. And then we've got this process between two people. This is also, a whole different set, and that's where conflict lies. But then additionally to that, we have that whole same process that I've just mentioned that comes on your side as well. We're talking about communication. And where it comes from is that I didn't realize how complicated it was, to the point that I was always in conflict with myself, with others, with my environment, with what I was doing. And I did that for like 10 years, like blinded. And being blind in conflict allows you to survive, but you can't thrive.
Okay, could you elaborate on that point?
Well, because when you're in conflict, you're continuously trying to survive. You are activated, your amygdala, hippocampus, all of the cognitive stuff that's going on biologically is shutting down certain parts of where you thrive. And as that shuts down, we become more on autopilot because we're in protection mode. And as we're in protection mode, we're not really showing our true selves. We are not feeling comfortable enough with being vulnerable. And if we're not vulnerable, then we don't have authenticity. And this is something that I've been only recently able to start to develop. And that's been in the last I would say 4 years. And that's when I went back to university. As an old person going to university, there's a lot to learn. But additionally to that, there's a lot of experiences that can be applied to what you learn. So it's like, it was so much better this time around. And so this is where conflict started to come in. Conflict and negotiations. So yeah, I have done a lot of different types of negotiations. It's true that I am a qualified hostage negotiator. I have worked in the field of negotiating, and it's not pleasant. But I think that what makes this all really pleasant is that I survived. And managing to deal with ambiguity, multiculturalism, and myself have been 3 key elements that have really shown me that I've graduated to be an adult. That and a child.
Yeah, I'm sure the child is just the closing of that loop. On the point, so it's very interesting to hear. I didn't know that the motivation for you going down that path was seeing, that chef and so on. And also what's interesting, and as you were just saying, the different aspects that you need to manage, for example, that you've had to manage in those situations, but also that internal process of communication, like those 3 channels. Am I comfortable with this? Is this something I'm comfortable sharing? How are they going to react? So I want to, I guess, start from here, because from our conversation, Kline, one big takeaway was definitions, right? What, for example, I can't remember what you asked me, but you asked me about, I don't know if it was anxiety or something. There was a question you asked me and you're like, but what does that mean to you? And from my perspective, I was curious. I'm like, why is he, I thought it would be very, I thought he'd get exactly like what I meant. But what I learned is everyone has a different definition of the same word. Conflict to you could mean something. Conflict to me could mean something else. Now, conflict shows up in so many different areas of life, internally, externally, arguments, fights, disagreements, wars, when you get big. So I wanted to set the stage first for today for the audience to understand from your perspective. How would you define conflict?
Conflict is misaligned energy. Period. That's it.
When you say misaligned energy, what does that mean?
See, now it gets a little bit more complicated because you have to start like high and then we go from there. So misaligned energy, like we could be having a conflict right now. Well, in fact, we are. Because you have an agenda, I have an agenda. We have different competing agendas, but we also have a lot of similarities there. However, if I was to touch on certain areas, I know that would escalate the situation. So conflict is much more about the management of energy than a resolution. The only time you get resolution is when you die. When there is no more energy exchange between 2 parties, this is when a communication stops. So we are constantly in conflict, whether it be positive or negative. You can't define conflict as positive or negative. It's energy. Just because it makes you feel a certain way, that's your lens, that's your definition. And this is the same with when you mentioned about anxiety. What is anxiety to you? And we dug into that because it's very different for you to me. So I would say that having conflict with someone is actually positive. We're designed as human beings to have conflict because it motivates us to change.
So conflict is the trigger typically for change from your perspective?
It can be. So it can be a trigger for change. It can also be a trigger for fight, flight, fright, fawn and freeze, I think. No, I said it in just different ways. But yeah, basically there's 4. There's not 3, there's 4. And when you look at it, no matter what type of human being we are, we all suffer from our own selves. And we seriously suffer. All of that negative self-talk is an internal conflict that's manifesting inside us. And then we're given some really beautiful mechanisms to feel shit. And as we start to believe in our own problems, they become more real. And as they become more real, they metastasize into something that isn't pleasant. So yeah, conflict in a nutshell is just misaligned energy, where by communicating, we can work on how to realign that.
Okay.
But not just communicating between each other. We need to start within and then work out. Because if we start out and then work in, we're forgetting ourselves. And we're the most important creature to ourselves. We need to look after ourselves.
And I think you made a great point there, that we typically think as conflict as an external thing, me and this person, me and, my boss, whatever. And when you reflect on it and look at it as more of an internal thing, we all experience that. That voice in the back of your head that says, negative things, and you try to fight it, and sometimes it wins, so there's a constant battle continuously going on within us. Now, you mentioned that a lot of times we're blind to this, right? Until we wake up and realize, oh, this is actually what's going on. So I'm curious for you. You said for 10 years you felt like you were blind to maybe the internal conflict that you were going through. So what changed? When did you realize, like, okay, there's something going on here, there's a misalignment, and how did you work to get realigned after that?
A lot of hard work. It's a ton of hard work. It's a ton of just letting go. And letting it go to what everybody else has told you. So I went to university again, as I mentioned, conflict resolution and negotiations. And they applied theories that started within. How to negotiate within, how to then negotiate externally. Because throughout that entire 10 years, I forgot that conflicts I didn't know the conflicts start within and they branch out, because another part of conflict that I didn't mention is the perception of conflict. How you perceive a conflict with someone else or with another entity. So whether that be with a state, whether that be with an individual, whether that be with an entity or a business. These all have motivating factors to create cognitive dissonance, which is basically scrambling and being confused. And the other side of it is the lack of bias. So the lack of understanding that even though I believe what I believe is true, how often is it really true?
That's a great point.
And this is something that has only been a recent change in my belief, which is don't believe what I believe, question why I believe what it is, and what's the motivation to believe in that. The outcome of that is that I start to pick apart, I'm being played like a puppet. Whether it be historically a puppet or whether it be between two people. The abilities to forget that I am just a bag of chemicals at the end of the day. And being that bag of chemicals means that things drop. And as they drop, I have these different motivational lenses. So it's kind of, I think that this is where I really took a back seat to start looking at the creature within.
The perception point you mentioned is actually very, very interesting, because that's what you're asking. Like, you asked me, what does interesting mean to you? That was the question that you asked me. But I digress. The perception part is, I think, from my perspective, where the biggest dissonance is, because as you just described, if conflict is just a misalignment of energy, and conflict can lead to positive change both internally and externally. But I think traditionally most people, when they hear the word conflict, they think fight, they think argument, they think war, they think it's very, very negative. So I think listening to you, step one is to just look at conflict from a new frame. But looking at conflict from a new frame is one thing. The next question becomes, how do you know when I'm in a conflict, not just with myself, but with someone else. Maybe externally it's a lot easier because you have feedback that will give you that information. But internally, I think is the hardest part to realize, oh, I actually am in conflict with myself. And this is something I've been reflecting on since our conversation, because you just gave me a new way to look at it. And I've been trying to look within. So over the last, couple of weeks, so since anytime I have a negative emotion, negative thought, I start to be like, oh, what's going on? Where is that coming from? And when you said it takes a lot of work, it does, because I've realized I've had to accept a lot of things about myself that I didn't want to accept. I've had to...
That's where the work is.
Yeah, I've had to take accountability for things that I either didn't know I had to be accountable for, or I didn't know how much of my own perception was playing into this. So what I've also realized is that work is hard, like you said, because although I'm aware of it, although I'm starting to question myself, the point you made earlier, there's the history, there's the trauma, there's so much, you have so much context, and I think believed it for so long that I'm questioning it, but the emotion just seems to be, it's just eating my logic, So I guess how do we start managing the emotions? Because that seems to be the most important thing underlying all of this.
Sleep, eat, train, tolerance. Those would be the 4 things that we need to do. Because sleeping refreshes us, food makes us less irritable, it also gives us sustenance and allows our brain to reduce the fog within. And as it comes for emotion itself, we need to understand that emotions are waves. They come and go. And as you said, digging deep. There's different types of digging deep. There's proactive and there's reactive. Now, unfortunately, we're all time travelers. And being a time traveler, we're too busy either reliving the past or projecting what our future is. And we forget to be here and now. And when we're trying to do that hard work, it's at those points that we realize, shit, where was I?
You literally hit the nail on the head. That's exactly how I felt.
And not realizing that, hey, I've just landed and I'm in a whole different world and I feel so vulnerable and exposed to myself and my own back information and my pretext here of my assumptions that are now being challenged within inside myself, not by anybody else, but within inside myself, feel rather confronting. My suggestion there is to tell that voice in your head, we've got plenty of time together. We've had plenty of time already. How about I just ask you to be nice to me? How about instead of being that biggest critic, start being more fair. Start realizing how much of the world I'm carrying for you. Because, there's different parts of your brain. And by just having that slight shift and knowing that you're going to make mistakes and being okay, the best information is based on the data you have at that one time. And let's be frank, most of us can't remember more than 3 phone numbers. So how are you supposed to remember a whole historic of information in your head and compute that to have an outcome where you're making the best decisions because of all of the things? You're not ChatGPT at the end of the day. You're a human with emotion, with the inabilities to understand or regulate all of yourself at any one time. So when I mention exercise, what I should have said is breathing. That's what's important. Being able to realize, whoa, I'm activated right now and I'm happy or I'm sad or I'm angry Or I'm furious. Just because you have this emotion doesn't mean that you can't wait it out. You can't acknowledge I have that. But as you mentioned, once you acknowledge that you have it, then what? And this is where definitions come in. This is where breaking those emotions down and understanding what anger is to you, what sadness is. Because one of the things that I talk about that I think is so important is that in Chinese traditional medicine, which is ancient, right? Anything ancient that's lasted to now means that they were onto something pretty substantial. And it's gone through a lot of rigor and testing. Well, I came to realize that the emotion for sadness, the emotion for fear, and the emotion for anger all have similar chemicals in some ways. And as a society, us as men, we need to project power and dominance, which means that our first port of call is angry. So one of the things that I've been working on for the last 2 years, if not 3 years, is why am I angry? Every time I get to a point of why am I angry, I'm looking at that and I'm starting to break that down. And in the time that I'm breaking it down, I don't become angry anymore because I'm no longer confused. I understand where I am, which is I'm sad, I'm hurt, I'm lonely, I'm afraid, I'm all of the things that we don't want to admit to ourselves, let alone the outside world. And this is where a lot of that conflict stems from. A lot of that miscommunication and a lot of that misalignment of energy that starts within. Starts all from breath.
And the last point you mentioned was tolerance. So the sleep I get. The exercise, yes. The breaking down emotions, like looking at it more objectively. Like you said, it is waves. It does come and go. You know, I've noticed, for example, like just reflecting since our last conversation, sometimes you just get caught, and you're trying to, okay, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And you're like trying to think, okay, it's because of this, it's because of that. Although it's helpful, and I am getting maybe some more clarity, it's not it's not removing the emotion. And I think the point you made about just now about, you know, vulnerability and when you can't show who you really are that's where a lot of, you know, this could probably stem from. But the tolerance aspect, and this is the point where me and you had a really deep conversation about, because tolerance is a very personal thing, you know, and I think the challenge in doing this work is understanding, at least I'm speaking from my personal perspective, is deciding on what I can and cannot tolerate. And although I need to be accountable, and one of the things you told me was we should only be accountable to ourselves and put our own expectations of ourselves. That was a big wake-up call because...
Why so?
Because I guess I assumed that the level of accountability I have to myself and to other people, I would expect the same from them. And reflecting on our conversation, I realized that doesn't make sense because it touches on the perception thing. You have a perception of the world and tolerance and what you can tolerate, and so do I. So how could I put that on you? But then when it comes to whether it's a romantic relationship, whether it's a business relationship, whether it's a friendship, that's where these two worlds are going to collide. You know, a friend might do something, you're like, I would never do that. But to them, that's normal. And then on the flip side, you might do something and be like, I can't believe you did that, but it's normal to you. So tolerance is the area probably myself I'm struggling with the most, because I'm like, I want to let go, but I also personally, I think, but there's some things my mind just will not change on that. So what do you say when people, because I think that's an area that a lot of people probably struggle with too.
I think it's a lot to do with value. Not your external values, but your internal values. What values do you hold really, really dearly that are yours? not given to you by someone else. Where is your moral compass truly sit? What are you comfortable with other people doing to you because you would do it to them? And it all comes back to a simple structure that I found really reassuring. And that's related to autonomy, status, fairness, relativeness. There's one more, but we'll get to that. And each one of these areas triggers us to say, hey, that touches my value. But values shouldn't equal insecurities, but quite often they do.
That's actually very true. Yeah, I never linked those two together. Yeah.
But quite often they do. And that's where I had the epiphany that, okay, what is my vulnerability versus what is my expectation of my personal status, how other people perceive me? And then I'm like, why does that matter? It doesn't really. It matters to me that I am authentic, because then I'm holding myself accountable for who I am. And then when it comes to like, I guess fairness. My wife is amazing. You touch her fairness, she will blanket the earth, because that is her point that really affects her vulnerability. For me, it's autonomy. I'm a free bird. You put me in a cage, it's really painful for me. And it's actually painful. Whereas some other people find status really important, saving face extraordinarily important. I don't. Sure, I like to be understood as someone who has acquired knowledge and applies that in an effective way. But I'm okay if you disagree with me, because the sky is blue, there are clouds, but you perceive there's chickens falling. That's okay. That's your choice. You know, depends on what you took that day. Depends on your chemical makeup. But it doesn't mean I need to disagree with you, because that would question your status. But if I allow curiosity to come in the place and to then bridge that gap of conflict of my dissonance versus your dissonance, and be like, hey, you're right. I see that the sky is now blue, and it's amazing that there's clouds here. Tell me more about these chickens. Can you explain to me what color these chickens are? Describe to me how quick they're falling. Now we're in a conversation in your world. Because think about it. Am I talking to me when I have a conversation, or am I talking to someone else? And quite often we're too busy talking to ourselves. So this is where status is affected. Certainty. That was the one I forgot. Ugh. Certainty is the ability of so many people who manage big projects. The ability is to manage ambiguity. I think that on a multicultural level, people who live in Asia are much more adept to managing ambiguity than people in Europe or the Americas, the Northern Americas. And that's because there's more structure. There's more easy, like, you do this, this happens. You do this, this happens. I worked for the German government for some time. That was rather easy, but very, very, very tough at the same point, because there is already expectations. But working in Iraq with them, there's like, it's like two worlds meeting each other, and you have to be the one in the middle that's kind of negotiating between two different competing parties and mindsets. When it comes to the next, which is autonomy, as I mentioned, autonomy is my weakness. So I thought I'd challenge myself. I got onto a plane and I went to Yemen. Well, turns out that once you get there, you gotta stay. You can't leave unless you quit. And I'm not a quitter. In fact, I'd rather torture myself to prove a point than to torture myself later about the point that I shoulda, coulda, woulda done. So yeah, I spent 42 days, every cycle in Yemen that was of bombardment. And the autonomy I found was within. And it was that first realization that, hey, the world is such a lonely place. And the only friend that I continuously have is that little voice inside my head. And it's really mean.
It is, yeah. It is.
How can I make it nicer? And it took me another decade before I worked out that there are ways to make it nicer. Relativeness. This is another key area that can be, I guess, it can really help when you're discussing matters with someone else. Because I can easily trigger your relativeness. Because it's in-group, out-group. It's that differentiation of tribes. You know, we're ingrained. You see the world, it's polarized.
Massively.
Well, you know, Peter Coleman is a lecturer from Columbia. I really enjoyed his whole series and the thought process that he has about polarization. That thought process is so similar with emotion. And his process of thinking about conflict within the polarization of two massive sides is don't just think it's us and them. Well, let's talk about us and them. Let's give them names. Let's humanize them. Let's see where those differences truly lie. And then let's put those aside for a second. And let's build on the things that we both share in common. Because now we're starting to be in a negotiation of fact, opposed to a negotiation of perception of differences. And then I've already mentioned fairness. So these are the 5 areas of models that we can use to help us become more comfortable with our internal compass that we have as individuals and we develop over years, opposed to that are given to us by different entities.
I think, first of all, that's incredibly insightful. And when you outline it like that, it's very helpful, not just to me, but for the audience, because it's like, where's the how? What are the triggers? What are the things? What are the questions I should be asking? But when I have these 5, and then you enter situations, you're in a conflict, whatever, then you can now have a reference point to start working on and building off and figure out, is it this? No, this doesn't really bother me. But this one, for example, really does. When you talked about autonomy, that is I'm very similar to you. That's my really, really big one. If I feel anyone's trying to control or whatever, that is when, that's when you'll be removed from my life like 100%, or I won't work with you. I won't be like, it's just not, that's my biggest frustration, because, and I think this comes back from childhood, from attachment styles, from all that. Yeah. I'm the kind of person, I never want to bother you, you know? So in what goes on in Khalid's head is, why are you bothering me? I'm putting an active effort to not bother you. So why are you coming and bothering me? You're like, fuck off. Like, get out of here. That's what you can feel it now, even in the point it hits that thing for me.
I feel it. Yeah. I see it even.
Yeah. It's a big one. And this is where, and now now we have this framework, and I want to bring this into the conflict example, because I think sometimes, so I'm really happy we've touched on the internal conflict, because I think that's a part of the conflict piece that is not talked about enough. So now that we have this context, I want to bring it into interpersonal conflict with people. So I think this would be very important for people to understand. What are the triggers, or what are the signs that you are entering into a conflict with another person? You know, is it the way they start speaking to you? Is it the lack of speaking to you? Because I think, like you said, if I don't know I'm in a conflict, I don't even know what to do. So what are the indicators that you are in a conversation with someone, you are moving into conflict? Because that's the escalation. And then once we're done, we'll dive into how to de-escalate that.
My first question is, are you an organism? Then you're already competing. We're already having a conflict. There's only so much resources, whether those be food resources, whether those be safety, shelter, whether those be a mate, whether those feelings of safety. All of these different areas can be triggers. But as someone who has those structure that I mentioned before, that is my professional go-to button of how to piss someone off. So if I want to piss you off, I'm like, okay, which one of these can I touch? So when it comes to conflict is an entire body. It's your entire body. Whether it be how intense you look at me, whether your eyes like dilate, whether your vein starts to move, your posture, whether you turn towards me, away from me, how your eyes look, whether you're like upping your lip, or, you know, whether your gaze changes and you move from this posture to this posture to this posture to that posture. You know, there is so many different elements that start before even the words.
Great. That's such a great point.
So you're entering into a conflict with somebody. Well, do you know that you're going to have one? So sometimes it's about historics. Okay, this guy, I know he's a dick. And I'm going to have it out with him. I don't know what about, but I just don't have a good feeling. Where do you think that good feeling sits? It sits deep down inside, behind our paywall, basically, our subconscious.
Great way to put it.
Yeah. And that's where the work comes in, right? So there are people out there that if they look like my cousin, I'm like, you're dead to me already. Because I had such a horrible childhood with him that I can perceive his facial features on someone else and I'm already like, no. And that's subconscious. But then a lot of people have that gut feeling. And that gut feeling is also about all of the things that they're reading, but they can't understand. So being dyslexic and someone of neurodiversity, I understand what it feels like to not be able to read. And that's why I studied all these things. So I could at least get to a position where I felt comfortable to have a conflict with somebody. Because tone, pitch, intonation, canter, choice of words, the lexicon you use. But choice of words can be different to lexicon. So whether you're talking too high or, you know, whether you're talking down to someone, up to someone, the positioning of even what you want to say, whether you come across thoughtful or whether you come across as like cavalier. All of these different positions are just one side of the conflict that you're starting to enter into, whether you know it or not. So there is a model out there of conflict escalation. It's 9 stages. It's by a guy whose initials are FG. The name escapes me. But it goes through 3 different phases. Win-win, win-lose, lose-lose. And then you can start to understand where in that negotiation phase you are, because conflict is just a negotiation.
I'm so happy you brought that up because that was the point I wanted to dive into. So when it comes to the negotiation piece, when it comes to conflict, or whether positively or negatively, the question. So I've, as you know, we spoke the other day. You know, I've done some research in this on this topic. It's an area that I want to improve on as well. It seems though, the typical negotiation that most people default to, unless you have some context of how to do it correctly, is, splitting the difference, as they put it. All right, I'm going to give you a bit of this. It's not exactly what I want. You're going to give me a bit of that. It's not exactly what you want either, but this is what we can live with. But if that's the frame of mind that we typically operate in, no one's really happy at the end. So how do you create a negotiation, or how do you negotiate in the first place to move towards win-win, as you put it?
As you mentioned, split the difference is a key factor. But it's intricate negotiations that becomes a true success. We're too busy, right? We're too busy to split that difference even. To sit down and say, hey, what are your needs? What are your values? Why are we even having this conversation? Because the majority of these negotiations are dead-ended. They're transactional. And yeah, my needs and your needs are often competing. We're both not going to be happy at the end of the day. But it's the value and the interests that we connect and align on that kind of push away some of that negative sentiment. I think that's a really key element to accept that your pie and my pie, there's a part of the pies that overlay, and we're going to be pulling at those parts. But fuck me, mate. You got a pie. I got a pie. Let's be happy. Mine's butterscotch and pumpkin. Really weird combination. But yours is blueberry and raspberries. That's okay. Mine is phyllo pastry. Yours is short crust pastry. Mine has very little sugar in it, apart from the butterscotch on the top, which I can choose how much I put in. Whereas yours is already inside. Do you see how we're already splitting differences here?
Yeah.
This is a true start of splitting the differences between needs, wants, values, ideologies. And we start to dig into these. As we dig into these different areas, what we find is that we can tolerate letting some of these things go if we've communicated them, if we don't feel like the other person's got the upper hand, if there has been a to and fro where we feel that it has been fair, that our autonomy isn't questioned, that our status hasn't been degraded, that there is still a level of relevance. So no matter which element we're discussing in a negotiation, or whether it be in conflict, we need to start here and then work out ways. So as I mentioned, there is 3 different levels. So we can go from win-win, and this is where we are, we're kind of flirting with one another. We're in a battle of wits, of ideas, and we want to try to see where we can make it. But then all of a sudden, things get a little bit real. You get triggered, I get triggered. Now we're in win-lose. Now at this point, you become a lot more assertive. So do I. Well, when you put 2 walls next to each other, what happens? They don't move. So you become into a stalemate. So you're like, okay, I'm going to get more assertive. I'm like, yep, I'm going to get more assertive. Now I bring a wrecking ball. You bring a wrecking ball. And this is where it's game over, because then both of us have a lose-lose. So this comparison here of negotiations and using distributive or intricative negotiations, because there's two types. Friends for the day, friends for life. So distributive, friends today. So when we look at the model of negotiation, and there's a simple model, and so many people forget about it. It's like the tasks versus the relationship. This is the outside axis. Then you have an inside axis. The inside axis is avoidant or basically giving it away, like acceptance. Then we have competing, which is what we just discussed, and collaborating when our values meet. And then we come to the middle, which is the compromise. But we have to get all the way around that border to actually get an outcome where we both feel that we have met our needs. So I hope that helps.
No, that's actually really helpful, because at least what I took from what you said is, okay, maybe I should start looking at negotiation as not necessarily outcome based but value based. Not necessarily about, how much, money you get for a deal, or, you and your partner, what you'll accept, what you won't accept. And this is all happening in real time. I think that is one of the areas that I have struggled with probably the most, because it was always outcome based. It was never on, that outcome triggered my internal values maybe I have low tolerance for, like the autonomy, for example, that I mentioned. Mm-hmm. So I think the next part of the question would be, what does a successful negotiation look like? Like, how do I know how would I judge if this was a successful negotiation or not, if I'm not looking at the outcome? And number two, when is it time to walk away? Because that's also something you have to keep in mind.
Fair enough. Okay, so a successful negotiation is where your zone of possibilities are, where your butner and my butner overlap, and that you have worked through your process, I've worked through mine, and the outcome is that neither one of us are miserable. Which means that you need to have a voice, which means I need to have a voice, but it also means I need to listen. And too often we forget about that. And I think that when it comes to negotiations, one of the very clear areas of a negotiation is, do I want to negotiate with them again? That is a clear indicator of a positive negotiation. When I'm negotiating for a relationship, I always leave things on the table. Not that I can't get them, but I want to come back, because next time there'll be more things on the table. If I take everything the first time, they'll be like, dude, I don't like playing with this guy. How's that fair? How's that messing with your autonomy at all? Yeah, of course it is. How's it with your relativeness? Oh, he's not like me. So you've got to think about how all of these simple elements constitute to a effective negotiation. You need to plan, right? And you need to have strategies, and there needs to be structures in place, like I mentioned with the Zopa and the other ones. This leads into, where do you walk away? Well, I have this famous saying that's in the men's group, and that I read, and that I don't remember the author, but basically it's to respect my bandwidth of tolerance for other people. And if my bandwidth is finished for the day, probably not a good idea to negotiate with somebody else. This is probably a good point to walk away and say, hey, let's do this tomorrow. But I need to tell them why. Because you need to signpost to other people. One thing that we forget is that we're not mind readers. I can't read your mind, sure as shit, I don't know what's going on in mine. So at that point, I need to say, hey, right now, I'm a little bit low in my concentration, which means that my patience for myself, it's going to be some harsh talk, which means that I'm going to take it out externally, which is going to make me look dumb. I don't want to look dumb. That's going to embarrass me. So do you mind if we have this communication tomorrow? Authentic communication shows humility. You didn't like it there for a second. I could read your face. But that's okay. Because so many people are afraid of what's beneath that. But as soon as you lift it and say, hey, this is who I really am, you can like me or you don't like me. I'm okay. Because I know on those days, the people who are like, yeah, I value him for some reason, are going to show up for me. Whereas the people that I'm like, hey, this is now my mask is off and I need your help, they'll be like, I don't know this person. So this is the difference. This is the difference between effective and an illegitimate negotiation, then also where to stop in a negotiation for the day. Now, if it is a negotiation that you're having and it's a walk away, well, how do you get those walk away points? You got to have those before you become emotional. Because you will become emotional before you realize that you need to walk away. So when you're going through your strategy, you're like, okay, these are the things I can let go. These are the things I can't let go. These are the things that if I let go, I value them high, medium, low, which means that I can only exchange them for higher, mediumer, or lower, but not the same value. Because remember, my circle and your circle, very different. So some things that are trash to me are treasure to you, like my ex. It's the way it is, right?
Yeah.
So these kind of things really start to play into it in real time. But as soon as you become emotional, you forget rationality.
When I was laughing as listening to you talk because everything you were saying, I literally made like all these mistakes like a couple of days ago where I reacted. I had not slept well. It was after a long day. Obviously, there's a lot of historical context that played into it. You know, we touched on that a little bit. And so it all just came together into this like...
perfect storm.
Yeah, literally. Perfect storm. Tears, shouts, you know, this like all of that. And
Did you have the tears or the shouting?
Both.
Cool.
Yeah. And what I realized listening to you just now is not only the walk away points is, I think a big thing that I took from it is signposting. You know, although I was aware that, you know, like I know myself when I haven't slept, like how I, even in a podcast, how well I do, how well I can communicate besides managing my own emotions. Like I've realized that, but also signposting of, even to it's not just signposting to the other person. I realize it's signposting to myself because you're in this storm and you like, your storm's like, go now. I should have had I don't know, it's the patience or the self-dialogue to be like, okay, if you have it now, this is, you know what the outcome will be. So you have to kind of I would have probably had to regulate myself to be like, this is not the time for this conversation. Come back when you have cooler heads and, you know, you're more relaxed. You touched on something earlier, and my wife and I have had a debate about this. Cool. So compromise and sacrifice. Okay. So we did a podcast together and we realized, and this is where the first time I realized that we had different definitions of these two things. Yep. So from her perspective, compromise and sacrifice are not the same. A compromise is when you give and I give. And a sacrifice is when it's 100 and 0. Okay, so win-lose, basically, in a sense. And from my perspective, I was like, I look at them as one and the same. It's just on different levels, because you can't have compromise without sacrifice. Because to compromise means I'm sacrificing something. So in that example, there was a clear, you know, we just look at it very, very differently. So I guess I'm just touching on this point because I think it would be relevant to people. What's your perspective on it? I'd really love to understand, like, how do you look at how you look at the difference between compromise and sacrifice? Because to me, it's one and the same. Just they're elements of each other. They're just on different levels.
Okay. Well, firstly, let's address that elephant.
Yeah.
Did you find some commonality between the two of you?
No, I wouldn't say. I wouldn't say we did. I wouldn't
Okay.
say we did because the context of the very specific situation we were talking about, we still look. I think we will always just look at it in two different
Well, let's
ways.
avoid the topic.
Yeah.
But let's look at the difference between the two sides.
Sure, yeah.
One is how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
One is how they feel.
Yes.
I think you both agree with that,
Mm.
right? She mentioned that it's much more about the internal suffrage, and you mentioned it's much more about the external suffrage. There's still suffering going on between the two of you. For me, I thought about this, and what I came back with was that they're both going to release chemicals that make me feel uncomfortable. One is going to be from a needs-based level. One is going to be from my ideology. A sacrifice is about entitlement, because you're projecting a level of entitlement that you haven't probably communicated to the other person. And then it's at that point that you're going to feel that, you violated me. Whereas the compromise is much more of a need. I need this, but I'm willing to go to this level. So I think that ideology or needs, wants, values kind of mix in there as well. So if you compare those two, not compare, but pair those two together, those two different structures, you'll find that it's a little easier to start communicating about it. Because this conflict that you're having is great to have now opposed to later. Because once there's babies involved, there's a slippery slope of acceptance and tolerance right there.
Yeah, we're going to touch on that in a little bit.
So this is where I think that, hey, be fair, be realistic, and understand that you have very little situational awareness of what someone else's sacrifice is, what someone else is willing to bend towards. Because at the start of any relationship, which is where this stems from, we all are superheroes.
Oh, yeah.
I love being a superhero. First 3 months, oh man, the best superhero ever. Then shit starts to fall apart. Then I can't keep up that facade anymore. Whether it be in work or relationship or wherever, honesty starts coming in. That's why I'm like, let's just get authenticity from the start. But that also comes with amazing amounts of risk and sacrifice. The sacrifice that I'm making to you is that at some point I'm probably going to lose you as a friend, because my honesty is going to upset you. And when it upsets you, I'm going to be like, let's talk about it. But I'm not going to be concerned by it, because these are your lenses. I can't change your lens. I can listen to where you're coming from, but that's where my overall acceptance of the two differences between compromise and sacrifice come. Because I'm willing to compromise to have a friendship, but I'm not willing to sacrifice my authenticity. But as I signpost it to you, you're like, oh, okay. I think there's no difference between let's go on a date today and let's go on a date in 3 weeks' time. Because, you think about it in a relationship. I have heard this time and time again from both men and women, which is, hey, I just want to have sex and it's no strings attached. And then one falls in love and then they're like, there's strings attached. But then there was this agreement that it's not. And then one party gets hurt. Why is that sacrifice? That sacrifice is about the lack of authenticity. Yes, I'm not sure whether I like you, but the pieces feel like they fit. Let's see how this rolls for a couple of weeks and go from there. Same kind of stuff.
I think the distinction you make between compromise and sacrifice is really interesting. I've never linked sacrifice and entitlement together. But when you said that, it really hit home for me.
Hurts, doesn't it?
Yeah, in a good way though, because she probably felt that way in that situation that I would feel in a different situation. So listening to you, I'm like, okay, you're willing to let some things go to make the friendship, the relationship better, whatever the case might be. But when you look at it as a sacrifice, it's a lot, I think, heavier, and it's a lot more. The phrase you used earlier is the bandwidth of tolerance. In sacrifice, I don't think you have much bandwidth for that. That's where that's why it feels like a sacrifice, because this is something, for example, I will not tolerate. Now on the communication piece, so I've been working. Communication is everything we've talked about is the mindset, the frameworks, understanding what conflict is and where is it coming up. Now, I've done a lot of research on communication. I just hired a communication coach as well because
well done, fella.
This is an area and it's so. We just had our first session yesterday, and it just showed me how blind I was.
That's amazing.
I was so happy. All these aha moments happening, but it's simple things like being granular, being specific. She asked me questions, and I responded to her email, and she responded. Be granular, be specific. And again, it was just it shone a light on a problem that I knew I have, because this is an area I've been trying to improve. And I think communication, like you said, communication is the antidote to negotiation, to conflict resolution. That's the medium where solutions can come and authenticity can be communicated. What I've realized working with her so far is when people talk about communication, it's usually Khaled speaking to Kline, or I'm presenting, or it's a very or body language. It's about an action. But what I've learned is actually starts from thought. I have to communicate different and to become a better communicator. I have to start thinking completely differently in a more structured way, in a more cohesive way. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions people have when they think, I want to be a better communicator, or how do I become one, is I need to take a public speaking course to do that. Instead of literally you have to change the way you think, which is, I'm learning, not easy to do.
So granular is really important. Just one sec. Okay. Just waiting. I think that granular is extraordinarily important. And structuring is really important. There was a key element that I want to pick up on from what you said. Talking to Kline. That refers, it's a one-way communication. Talking with Kline, that's a two-way communication. Already in your mindset. I hear that from a neuro-linguistic programming as, what's really going on in Khalid's mind? Right now we're in a conflict. You didn't even realize there was one. From me signposting, hey, I feel vulnerable because I thought this was about us. Don't you want to communicate with me? That's what makes things interesting. But most people are too busy to effectively communicate and enunciate their words. They're all in a rush. LOL. What is it? Too long, didn't read. Whatever that one is. And if you understand the type of communicator you are, sure, you can work on certain areas. And I think that having someone who is fluent in communication, having your back, amazingly important. Right now, I am coaching a 2-year-old to be granular. I want this. Give me that. What about this? Why that? And I can see the significant importance there. I never paid too much attention to that. And then going forward with my significant other, who is truly a better half than I am. I didn't think that for a long time, but I've come to realize it truly is. That makes me lucky.
Me and you both, man.
Huh?
Me and you both.
Yeah, true that. Nice save.
No, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is that when you're not clearly picking your words and expressing your true statements, it leads to conflict because there is unmet needs, wants, desires, facts. Omission is not a lie. Omission is just the human condition. To go further on that and to start saying very specifics, what are you doing? You're reducing anonymity. You're enhancing vulnerability. You're asking the elephant to leave the room because you're like, it's there. It is what it is. It's like when you're in a negotiation with someone who is suicidal, saying, are you going to kill yourself? Where do you go from there? It's a binary question. Yes, no. Well, I was talking to a guy from the Royal English military. Oh no, he was from the RAF, the flying side. And he had one of his friends die, self-selected, suicided. And that guy was special forces in English terminologies. And his friend was like talking to me because he picked me out of a crowd. I was speaking in front of 100 people. And he came up to me later because I could see him moving around at the back, just trying to get my attention. And I thought, that's odd. That's strange. So about 45 minutes later, I found him in the crowd. There's like 3,500 people there. Not all for my talk. I wish they were, but it was only 100 for my talk.
100's a lot.
It's a good start, right? And I said, why are you interested in what we were talking about? He was like, it was the wet weather friends. Everybody is there for you on the good days, but no one's there for you on the shit days. And I had a friend. I'm like, oh, past tense. Tell me more. And he told me a story. But basically, throughout the story, there was just one question that I asked him. Why didn't you just ask him, did he want to kill himself? It's like, such a fearful question, right? Such a powerful question to ask a friend. Hey, are you feeling very vulnerable right now and you don't have any other choices apart from to think of this long-term solution for a short-term problem? And if someone says no, well, that doesn't mean no, right? No now. I teach my daughter that too. No now. She says no, I'm like, no now? She's like, no now. Because it is no now. Because that could change. So where we go from here is asking the individual, hey, are you thinking of killing yourself? Yes. Well, now you've got to double down, right? How? What's your plan? Then you can start to assess how serious your friend, colleague, lover, whoever is. And then you seek immediate help, okay?
Yeah, please do.
That's as far as you go.
Yeah.
You seek immediate help. But the fact that you have entered into their realm and sat with them in such a vulnerable place where it is so much about the relationship opposed to the task of ticking off that person's okay or not. Because you sat with them in such a vulnerable moment. Do you not think that so many people in this world may still be here if just one friend said, hey, and had that uncomfortable conversation about just enunciating, being granular, being honest, and being vulnerable? That was an unexpected twist. But this is where it really comes from. And this is why I'm like, hey, I want to help people. Like, I've helped millions of people already. But that doesn't mean anything. Because that was help for the day. A 1,000 people for water for a day. Turns out to be 1 million people over the context of a year. That's a big number. I contributed to that. I contributed to water, sanitation, hygiene, medical, schools, so many different areas. But the people who really sit with me are the individuals that I have directly touched, like this. Buzz. And those people, I always have a relationship with them. But it's been very granular. Same with emotion. When you are angry, articulate, how angry are you? I am furious. I am mad. I am annoyed. I am irritated. I am perplexed. I am so frustratedly confused. I am fuck. I just gave you 8 ways to say that I'm angry. And different levels of anger. So get granular with your emotion, get granular with your negotiation, get granular with your communication, because you will effectively create more friends.
I'm smiling this whole time listening to you because it's just like light bulbs are going off in my head. I love the point you just made about the different types of the different ways for me to communicate with you. For example, how I'm angry. Something so simple, because you go through these experiences, you feel certain ways, and then when you articulate, it's like, oh, I'm angry. It's always like it's almost like you jump to a level that you might not necessarily be at, or you bring down a level that you should be at. And that creates confusion, not only with the person that you're dealing with, but also with yourself. Because then you're like, am I this angry? Am I not this angry? And coming back to the point, the very astute observation you made earlier about talking to clients. Literally last night, I realized that was one of the mistakes I was making. I was literally 12 hours ago. I realized, because we were talking with my coach about, I've had all these meetings and I've reflected a lot. I know some areas that I didn't listen enough, and some areas that maybe I spoke too much and so on. And the last meeting I had, I thought I did really well. But again, it was another wake-up call that I always felt, and maybe this is something that happens to other people. I'm going to share my experience. I always felt I will listen to your questions, I will summarize, I will respond. But this, for example, what I do with my agency and launching podcasts, for example, a lot of people don't understand what it is, the benefits, what are the opportunities. So I give you like this whole context of this is why, whatever. And what she was telling me, she's like, your job is not to convince. Your job is to specifically communicate and respond to whatever they're talking about, their pain, their need. And I think this is a problem that happens not just when you're having like a negotiation or like in a sales setting, but even between each other. Because what am I speaking to right now? What's the, coming on the point you mentioned earlier, the trigger? And this kind of leads us into the pressure aspect. Because given your experience, you know, you've communicated or had to communicate effectively in the highest stakes situations. And I know through the workshops that you do is about not only communicating, being granular with clarity and being specific, it's also about how to do it under pressure. So I think this would be a good point in the conversation to dive into pressure and stress, because from my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, chemically it's the same thing. It's just my perspective on it is different. And I heard once someone say on a podcast, pressure is a privilege, which I like that, you know, that took away from, you know, the negative aspect I had of it. So I want to understand from you, Kline, the pressure aspect. How can we understand, how do we define it, first of all? How can we understand how to deal with it? And what's going on in our bodies that we're not aware of that is hindering our ability to communicate effectively? Sorry, that's probably a lot of questions in there. But
there is a ton of questions in there.
sorry.
A ton of questions.
See, got some specificity work to do.
No. I would say that there's a ton of questions. I need to keep up with you right now. That's where that is. So first nugget is I realized that I was communicating poorly to my wife because I was communicating with her, but not about her. I was paraphrasing, mirroring, summarizing. I was selectively pausing. I was picking the right metaphors. I was using kinesthetics when she was saying I feel, or auditory when she said I hear, or, you know, I was using all the right bits and pieces that I've been taught. What you don't really get taught is about the other person.
Yeah, that's so true. So true.
And I think that this is that epiphany of like, hey, sit in a movie, enjoy the movie. Do you talk during the movie? No, because you want to watch it. You want to see what it's about. Don't interrupt the movie. Let it just be. You can be an actor, but be a non-playable character at that point. That doesn't mean be inert. What that means is that we want to be somebody who can feel it all, but doesn't respond to it. Because then we're not in the other person's moment. We're in our moment. Difference between stress and pressure. When it comes to stress and pressure, external constructs, internal constructs, right? Pressures are areas to perform. Stresses are chemicals within inside ourselves that create, I was going to say discombobulation, but it's not the right word. I would say it's disharmony within inside our equilibrium of calmness. So let me put it to you another way. If we're on a boat and that boat is clear sailing, we have no stress. There's no external pressures. Now we have a boat with a hole in it. That is a pressure. It's not a stress. But if we have a boat that has high waves and a hole in it, now we have, sorry, I got that confused, but if we go again, the boat with the hole is the internal side, right? This is our pressure because we've got a finite resource, which is that we have a boat that's sinking. We put waves on top of that. That's our external side to perform in very uncomfortable situations. this is where homeostasis is really the key to life. Fuck this happiness. It's fleeting. Pursuit of happiness, you're going to chase your tail.
Yeah. It's very true.
Sorry for all those people who are hoping to be happy. Treat happiness no different to you treat sadness or anger. It is just an emotion that comes and goes. Spend it wisely. That's the difference. Spend your happiness. Don't chase it. Because you'll be perpetually in the future, or you'll be lamenting in the past. So again, stop being a time traveler. So hopefully the boat makes sense and you've done all the edits, because totally I got it around the wrong way the first time around. But the second time around, I got it much better.
Yeah.
So, when someone says, how are you today? Generally I check, am I homeostatic? And what that means to me is, am I bleeding? No. Am I hungry? Yes, no. Am I tired? Yes, no. Am I too caffeinated or not caffeinated enough? Yes, no. Has there been any turmoil during my day that has created me feeling not so well at some point? Because that carries through the day. It's not just like, hey, 10 minutes later, I'm okay again. No, I'm not. I'm still fucking elevated because my cortisol level has dumped and I'm still not in a great shape. But I think that I'm in a great shape. Yeah, no. So this is also about that bandwidth. So coming to that, when someone says they're fine, yeah, cool. But how did they get to fine? So I like to practice humanizing people. So whenever I go somewhere and I'm like, they're like, how are you? I'm like, I'm amazing. But more importantly, how are you? Do you hear the tone, intonation, and the abilities to push that projection of you? 9 out of 10 times, people actually stop to think how they are. And the outcome of that is that I stand out as a human being. I stand out as someone who wants relationship. Because I'm going to enter into some sort of negotiation with them. And quite often, I come out with more, just by a simple sentence. So allowing them to feel that there is less stress because I'm interested in who they are, and to allow them a pressure release gives them catharticness, which is more than most people do, especially in Dubai. So
the point you made about, first of all, I think the boat example is a great metaphor for explaining the differences between, I never looked at it as pressure as an internal thing that is my cue that I need to perform, and stress is something that comes externally, because I'm just trying to reflect on the times I've said, oh, I'm stressed. I'm trying to reflect, was it because I had doubted my ability to perform, or was it this specific situation or thing or thought has triggered me into, applying that? So having that distinction is actually very, very helpful. And the point you made about showing, I think it's not just showing interest, but showing care and empathy to other people, like the way you just said, even that it was so small, but I felt it. I could feel that, like, oh, this is someone who is giving me their time and is interested in me. And at the end of the day, I think the world is just becoming a lot lonelier, and anyone that can make someone's day a little bit better could be massive. Like in the example you said with the whole suicide thing, imagine if one person, someone, or a stranger or a friend had just made that phone call, said that thing. How many people would still be here? I think that's a very sad, unfortunate thing that is the reality of, I think, a lot of how life seems to be. And in this whole conversation, Kline, where this is where, and we touched on this last time, where my frustration comes in, because to do all these things that we're talking about, the thoughtfulness, the care, the techniques, the mindset, the work, and I know it's not for other people, you're doing it for yourself, but you live in a world, there are other people. And that's where, the frustration comes, when things like tolerance, frustration with accountability, expectation, and all that stuff. And this was a point that I think would be very helpful, very interesting for people to hear, when we touched on rules and policies. Because when we talked about that, you said rules have consequences and policies are what's the word?
Guidelines.
Yeah, guidelines. And they can, they're changeable, or, they're malleable, that's the word. Now, I was thinking we were talking about it in a personal relationship context. But I think this also applies in business and in work, because when you join a company, when you work with a group of people, there's a culture, there are rules. And if culture is, this is interesting. Is culture guidelines? So is culture policies, or is culture rules? Because you hear so many different things that if there's a bad apple, get rid of them fast. This is a rule we have, or this is a guideline we have. You cannot do 1, 2, 3, 4. There will be consequences for that. So I think rules and policies, even myself personally, I'm still grappling with it in my head to come up with my own definition that makes sense to me. But I think it would be useful for people to understand, or for you to share from your perspective, the distinction between rules and policies, and what are the disadvantages that can come with having such strict rules?
I really like this question. It's very complicated, right?
Yeah.
But relationships aren't binary. Rules are binary. They're written, they're black and white. In some countries, rules are arbitrary. In other countries, rules are very codified. For over a decade, I worked as an international security expert. My job was to create policy, define rules, enforce social norms. When you have policies are no different to collective understandings of how people will operate under a certain given construct, context, a relationship. As I said, rules are binary. If you're in a relationship with somebody and you say, these are the rules, well, the other person can choose to follow them or not. Consequences are there, as rules have consequences. Who enforces those consequences? That's number one. Number two, whatever consequences there are they going to be accepted by the other party? If there is no breaking of a rule known to the enforcer, how can the enforcer enforce the rule? AKA cheating. If you have policies, these are like psychological safety in a relationship, at work, anywhere, where you have the abilities to communicate effectively or ineffectively, depending on how granular you get. I did bad, or I was driving late at night, drunk, and I crashed the car. In a relationship, you're going to have a policy of like, hey, that's not smart. Firstly, you could have hurt yourself. Secondly, you've hurt our assets. Thirdly, you could have gone to jail. And fourthly, why didn't you just call me? This is where there's psychological safety. But in rules, okay. Firstly, you're drinking under the influence. There's one punishment. You're using a vehicle that you don't have authority to use. Authority is a big thing. You are traveling at 3. Why are you traveling at 3 o'clock in the morning? Why did you drink so much? Are you in control of yourself? These are all rule-based questions. How does that affect your relativeness, your fairness, your autonomy, your certainty, your status? All of those things are going to be gone, boom. So why do you want to have rules in a relationship? Because you don't feel comfortable. You can get hurt. There's emotions at stake. This is where policies are more important, where the abilities to communicate with your other person, even if it's in a work environment, where you have policies about certain things, how to communicate within a big group, who's going to communicate first, what are the principles of the communication. You're not going to tell a story for 2 hours like we're having a chat here, right? You're going to be short, sharp, to the point, effective, in and out. Why? Because you respect everybody's time. How will a policy be enforced? Socialization. It's all about omnipresence of force. It's not about force. The application of force, you already lost. That's distributive.
It's the invisible hand, I guess.
The invisibility is so much more powerful. So this is where you have that abilities to be like, hey, these are our policies, these are our family values, or this is our work values. You've crossed the line. What are we going to do about it? What do you think we should do about it? What does the populace say about your behavior? And go from there. Because if the populace is just 2 people, then you're both 50-50. If the populace is 100, then you've got 1%. So ask the whole crowd. Because at right that point, if that one individual feels so vulnerable because they did something naughty, well, their internal consequences are going to be so significant that they will want to leave. So it's also about this thing of karma. It's not really about karma. It's about the internal monologue that we have. So I think that going back to it, if you were to have policies in a relationship, then you need to have your ZOPA, your area or your zone of possible agreement.
Yeah.
Yep. And I would err on the side of caution of having too many rules. Sure, you can have 1 or 2 rules, but rules are barriers. Those barriers need to be reviewed from time to time. So, maybe for the next 6 months, those barriers are, hey, 1, 2, 3. But come back to them. Talk about them again. Not because you want to change them, but maybe they have changed because you've grown, or she's grown, or the company's grown, or the context of how you negotiate has shifted because you've learnt more things. So keep with that growth mindset at the end of the day. Don't be ones and zeros. Question why you have your rules in place and how your policies shift.
It's very interesting hearing, and again, even with listening to you describe it, in my head, I'm still struggling connect it or conclude, like come to my own like understanding, and I'll explain why. So I understand from your perspective that the policy is the guideline. We looked at it in the personal context, we looked at it in the work context. It's like, guys, this is how we want to work together, or in a relationship, this is how we want to live together, or so on. Now, I think from my perspective though, and maybe this is where my disconnect's happening. because that sounds great, and that's positive, and it's collaborative. You know, we can come together and figure something out. But what goes on in Khalid's brain is then that means rules are bad. But I don't believe that's true. Maybe from my perspective, it's a combination of the two. And this is where I started thinking about the concept of the law. Is the law rules or is the law policies? Because the law can be interpreted in lots of different ways. So, and do you see, I don't know if I'm explaining myself correctly, but there's, in Khalid's brain, there's 1 + 1 is not equaling 2 yet. So that's why I'm trying to understand for myself, and maybe other people are, struggling with this too.
It's a great question. And I think that we all struggle with it. Let me get you to do some more cognitive work.
Sure.
It's very simple. Do you want to live in harmony or not?
Yes, of course. Who doesn't?
Policies and rules. Do you want to live in a environment that is full of pressure and stress, dysregulation, uncertainty, ambiguity? I know I've lived in all of those things. It's not pleasant. Hence why humans make rules, to avoid unpleasantness. Hence why they have policy, to clearly define why it's a good idea. But what about entrepreneurs? Entrepreneurs don't have the same set of rules, right? They're doing a lot of work that dysregulates the current financial ecosystems. And then we have the drug industry. Only in the last decade has big pharma, done the unthinkable and literally became a drug baron bigger than what we had in Colombia back in the day. How crazy is that? And now they have this amazingly billion-dollar lawsuits that they're having to pay out because they didn't follow social norms and social expectations. So again, if you want to live in harmony, then there is a level of policy that you need to have. Rules are only there when things are out of harmony to bring them back to being fair. If you believe in those rules. If you don't believe in those rules, then that's where I've lived. I've lived in most of those places for a decade. It's not pleasant, it's bloody hard. There's a lot of suffering. There's a ton of suffrage. And quite frankly, I have the abilities to live in both worlds. But when I go home to my house, I want to know that the front door is still there, that the gas is going to be on, that the electricity works, that I might get a hot shower. Do you know for 42 days I never had a hot shower?
What?
Yeah, that was shit.
Yeah, sounds like.
And it continued, like, every time I was there. So, like, the abilities to have those niceties in our world, a lot of it is contributed to rules and policies and making the world a more structured place. I was going to say better, but it's not true, because a lack of structure is sometimes great, because fluidity is a lot to do with human nature. So it's kind of a little bit that way. So I hope that like unpacks it a little bit more.
It does.
And pushes you to consider, like, what do you want?
Yeah. I think the unlock came listening to you now, when it's not just looking at it from, it's not the harmony, it's just, I think where I was struggling is when should rules come into place? I think that was my question, because there, like you said, there are consequences to rules. But I think for me, that's speaking personally, I think maybe I've been way too rule based, and I'm now trying to work to be more policy based. And it's something literally my wife and I were having a discussion the other day, reflecting on our conversation. I'm like, because I started to realize, because you made a point, who sets the rules? Did you agree to the rules? Did we say, oh, these are the rules we are agreeing on? In some situations, no. And then because then that has tolerance and bandwidth and values and the five things that we talked about. So, like you said at the beginning of this conversation, Kline, it's simple, but it's complicated, because in each part that we've discussed today, the frameworks or the processes to think about are simple, but to get to that, you have to go through all the complexities to make that work, and to make it, as you put it, in harmony too. And I wanted to round off our conversation for today. I've just got 3 more questions for you, and the only reason I'm rounding it off is because I'm on a time limit. That's all.
Okay.
And I wanted to round off by speaking about the work that you do now with Dadee Services. So you said, I want to make sure I say it right. Nothing reshaped you, given all that experience, 20 years as hostage negotiation, cold showers, being in difficult situations, different policies, values, rules that you've had to deal with. And you said that you can live in both worlds. But now it seems like now you have a daughter, it's a brand new world. And I even saw some of the content that you posted on Instagram of cooking. When you guys are cooking together, make it an experience rather than, interactive. I don't know why that one, I don't have a child, but that one just hit home for me. I don't know why. And I know the reason you're doing it is because a lot of fathers are struggling. We, in our conversation a few weeks ago, I was mentioning to you, I'm like, that's something I'm terrified of. There's a part of me I know there's a deep part of me that's excited, but there is a significant fear. So I'm curious, first of all, what has fatherhood taught you so far about life? And what's your mission with the work that you do? How are you helping fathers?
So the biggest shift was acts of service without the expectation of reward. I have done acts of service ever since I left school, being a chef, working in security, doing all of the hard yards. But nothing prepares you for the internal appreciation that you get from helping someone else. Quite like helping an infant. Sure, there's a lot of chemical attachments and there's all these biological things that really mess with us in Mother Nature. But that's the true driving factor. It's all about unconditional love. I never experienced it growing up. There was always conditions, much like your rules.
Well played.
Thanks. And I've started to work on unconditional love, both for my partner, my daughter, and me. Having unconditional love for myself. That doesn't mean I'm in the shower every day doing what we do. That means that tolerance and forgiveness. And men are so task-focused on getting shit done. Because that's what our societies demand us to do. But coming home from work, cooking some Anzac biscuits together, the laughing, the joy, the teaching that goes with Anzac biscuits. What is an Anzac biscuit? Why is it important? Not only does it taste good, but there's historics behind it. There's also, like, I love to cook. We can connect without talking. It's lovely to connect with someone without having to talk to them, without having to have any kind of pretext apart from just to do something together. To put flour in a bowl, to put the different ingredients, to have an outcome that you can mash in your fingers. This is exploratory learning. This is stuff that my wife deals with. She's the one that does all the smart stuff. I wish I was that smart. But from a perspective of connection, that's relationship building to me. That's getting in the trenches and just making a mess together. And then we have an outcome where we sit together and we have a cookie. And this is a story of life, right? You work together towards building something. You show patience while you cook it. The outcome is that you get to enjoy something together. Many men forget that these little tiny things are fleeting. 12 years. If you feed your kid chicken with lots of hormones, you got 10 before they change into monsters. But it's nature. It's that separation, that viability. So when you have them, kids that is, think about why you really want them. Have that conversation. It's going to be really uncomfortable. Like super uncomfortable, because you both are going to disagree.
Yeah. That's
about
true.
So many things.
Yeah.
How to raise it, why to raise it, what to listen to with your family, like both families, because now you're doing not interpersonal or intrapersonal, but you're doing intra-group. Holy shit. Things get complicated real quick. Not to mention that there's all of these new pressures, stresses, confrontations, things you've never had to deal with before. Wow. Your wife or your partner or the person you got pregnant, depending on how that happened, they're going to go through so much changes. So why Dadee Services was built was because I was failing in all areas. I'm a really clever person. Or at least I've been told that. And I keep getting told that. And it's really annoying because I don't deal well with compliments. And you can see it on my face. It frustrates me.
I know.
And yet I couldn't do something simple like this to maintain a relationship with my partner that was healthy. And I was like, why isn't there more people out there trying to support new dads or dads to be? Truth is, there's no money in it. That's the truth. It's really sad. But it's also really true that most men feel that they show up for their families because of the tasks they do, not because of the relationships they create. So it's about it's about a mindset shift. It's about owning the fact that you are in a relationship, not only with your significant other, but your kids. That these kids can be the source of so much joy. They have a ton of frustration, right? But they bring like a little baggie of love. Every one of them. Oxytocin. You smell those heads? You get a hit of it every time. So that joy that came with being a dad, I wanted to spread that. But I wanted to get to the how and the why and understand that, hey, I wasn't alone. Now, there's lots of dad groups out there. What makes this difference is that it's about negotiating. It's literally what we talked about today. Honest conversations that are structured, and the outcome is that they're transformational. They also empower to ask the right questions to your partner, yeah, you might get some derailment. But isn't it better to get derailment before the train's going at 110 kilometers an hour opposed to just leaving the station? I also do coaching for juveniles. This is around leadership. But this is around situational awareness. Because if I had the emotional intelligence now that I had, at least half of that when I was 18, 20, 25, 30, I would have made some different choices that would have made me find homeostasis sooner. So in a nutshell, it was born out of fire. It was born out of years of conflict, years of suffering, and the fact that I took my mask off to my partner and my partner didn't like me. How confronting after a decade or more, 12 years that we were together. And I'm like, hey, this is who I am. And she was like, who? So consider that next time you're also going to be in a difficult situation, because I do mediation as well. But the outcome of all of that is that it's all about one simple thing: the lack of alignment of energy between two parties. So that's what Dadee Services is.
Well, thank you so much for giving us that context. And listening to the story and the way you talk about the experiences you have with your daughter. Like, for example, I was at a friend's house a few days ago. It was his son's birthday. And me and this kid just vibe. You know, I'm obsessed with this kid. And we got into this game somehow that we just were running back and forth. We probably did like 100 laps. There was, I think we said last time, maybe 100 times before the next 900. So what's interesting, like, I think those experiences make me more, make me excited about it. But then I'm speaking just personally here, I don't know about other people. The fear that comes with it touches on all the things you mentioned. You know, the relationship with my partner is a really, really big one. Teaching it the lessons that I didn't learn. How do I give you everything I had, but teach you from the mistakes that I made too? You know, it's a real mind fuck, like, you know, in my head.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. And I haven't even had the kid yet. So I can't even, that's why everyone talks about being ready for this, not being ready. And everyone says you'll never be ready. But the point you talked about, these difficult conversations are very important. And, you know, I've seen it firsthand in my relationship. This is not uncommon. We don't like having these conversations, but eventually life moves on. You change, people change. You're going to get to a stage and situations that you will have to deal with this, whether you like it or not. So might as well at least get a head start by starting having these conversations now. And I think the work, because you've done this, it's always interesting how you can have all the theory and all the awareness to see other people, but we're blind to ourselves. I think that's such a, I want to say sad, but frustrating thing about the human condition, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people, like, just reflecting on that meeting we had 2 weeks ago, is a massive need for the kind of work you're doing. So, you know, thank you for doing that, because I don't even have a kid and it was helpful to me. That conversation we had was incredibly helpful to me. You know, a lot of the context of this conversation has been reflections of the conversation that we had. So thank you for that. I really do appreciate it. To round off our conversation for today, Kline, just 2 more questions for you. These are questions I ask all my guests.
Can I just, one more thing?
Please, yeah.
See, what all of that is about affective leadership. That's what I'm training you to do. Lead with your emotional intelligence in an affective way, so your family trusts you as a dad or as a provider. And that's what's so important, is that you feel capable of being a leader, to have difficult conversations, to negotiate through those hard moments. So thanks for giving me the space to explain it more to you.
No, of course, absolutely, man. I thank you for closing the loop on that, because I think we as men you mentioned it perfectly earlier about we're very task oriented. So I'm a provider means I have to do things to provide. And that is I'm fulfilling my responsibility, but I'm neglecting that emotional side, the emotional connection, the vulnerability, the taking off the mask. And I think all men will go through their own, because you're going to have to deal with that at some point, whether you like it or not, and because if you don't, things are going to go either one way or another. That's where the crossroads end up typically. But to round off our conversation today, Kline, I swear if I didn't have to, I would love to continue the conversation, but we'll have, hopefully we'll do another round 2 for sure. Because just on a personal level, I think the work you're doing, I have learned so much from it already in just a very short amount of time. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show, because I know there's a million people in the world that will resonate with what we talked about in this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
For my last 2 questions, first of all, looking back at your life, either personally or professionally, when I ask you the question, what are you most proud of for yourself? What would you say?
Saying no.
Saying no.
Mm-hmm. That would be the most proudest moment. The abilities to stop working in the international diplomatic scene, working in international security, knowing things that are advantageous to know, helping countries to enhance the everyday lives of their citizens, to just focus on one person, to just focus on my nucleus, family, to do something that requires both sacrifice and pressure, but also a significant amount of humility. So yes, to be able to say no.
I think, the ability to say no is one of the most powerful tools you can develop. I think a lot of times we say yes for many different reasons. People pleasing, attachment, so many reasons. But what I've learned is when I say no is when I take ownership, when I take control, because it's a autonomous decision that I'm taking. A lot of people can say yes for a lot of different reasons, please someone, do all that. But when you say no, everyone knows what no means. And that is where, you start drawing those boundaries, setting those lines and so on. So if that is what you're most proud of, that's fucking awesome. And for my last question, Kline, what is the message you'd like everyone to take home with them today?
Please be nice to yourself, because no one else will be unless you are to yourself.
I don't think there's a better way than that to round off the podcast for today, man. Kline, I want to say thank you so much, man, for coming on the show and for giving me your time. And more importantly, on me on a personal level, for that conversation that we had, because it has been a massive epiphany. And I'm going through a process of a reprogramming, I'd call it now, unlearning. I'm trying to improve in all aspects, on the communication, on a personal level, with my partner. And at the same time, it's also been humbling to be like, yeah, okay, now I have a new way of working. Doesn't mean you think it's going to be a straight line and everything's going to be smooth. Yeah, it's a process,
Remember to signpost.
Yeah.
Because people aren't aware that all of these things are happening inside.
Mm-mm.
So they've got the context of who you were, not who you are. And they'll drag you back to where you were, not who you are now. So just word to the wise. Yeah.
No, I really appreciate that, man. And yeah, just for all the amazing work you're doing, I think supporting fathers, I think there's such a big, I think the demand for what you do is growing more than ever now. And people need to hear this, and conflict's not going away. Negotiation isn't going away, and neither is communication. So the work you're doing is very pertinent to where we are in the world right now. If people want to work with you, reach out with you, connect with you, where can we get in touch?
Dadee Services. That's the Instagram. You can go online. It's also there. But it is DADEE. So it's Dadee. It's like how my daughter says it. It's not like how Dada.
Yeah.
So it's Dadee Services. Yeah, and get in touch. And even if it's just for a first round chit chat, it might spark something that you didn't know about.
Guys, please, if you're someone who's interested in this, please reach out to him. I can 100% attest to that. From one conversation, there was just endless epiphanies, and we'll make sure to put all of this in the show notes. Kline,
Cool.
Thank you so much, man. This has been an absolute pleasure. I really, really appreciate it. My man.
Thanks.
Thank you. Guys, to everyone listening, please make sure to like, follow, share, and subscribe to the podcast. I hope it helps pod on all channels. And as always, guys, hope it helps. Peace.
There you go.
Yeah.
Cheers, brother.
And that's another episode in the bag, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really, really appreciate it. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, podcasting is like this massive jigsaw puzzle, and my job is to help you find that missing piece. So if you're someone who's looking to launch your own podcast or take their podcast to the next level, you can book a call today and let's get started. TikTok.